Welcome to the Founders Foyer with me, Aishwarya. This foyer is full of conversation. The space where creators, founders, and builders look for all the support and concepts to grow their ideas into products. To think and to create are by far the most satisfying part of what we all do. As new technologies come in, the crux we keep getting closer to is thinking clearly and shipping more frequently. AI has been always present and has made this process not just up leveled in speed, but also introduced more like a sidekick approach. So, how to incorporate AI and still build a unique taste? What's it like to ride with the AI and find more individuality with the creative projects and businesses that we build? We've got just the right person with us today to talk about all of this. Say hello to Dan Shipper, one of my favorite creators, and he's the co founder of Every, a creative media company that works to make you smarter about tech, productivity, AI, and it's also trusted by about 70,000 builders. Dan is a writer, thinker, podcaster, builder behind an AI chatbot, and his work currently is filled with a lot of tinkering around with AI and shipping projects. Hi, Dan. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thank you for such a lovely introduction. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So, like I said, I've really been a great follower of Every. I think it's like I've suggested Every to so many folks because of the amount of candidness that the newsletter carries and a lot of deep dives that you folks do. So I can't wait to talk about all of what went behind the process.
Thank you. I always love to hear that. It really means so much. I appreciate you reading and recommending.
Awesome. Cool. So why don't we start with this? Grok, the AI assistant on X, calls your online vibe as digital roller coaster ride through the mind of a modern day philosopher. Wow, that's like so cool. So, what's been your vibe lately, Dan?
What? Wait, what did you feed it? What did you feed Grok? Just like
You know,
my
like, yes, your tweets.
wait, what was it again? It was a roller coaster ride through a modern digital philosopher.
Yes, yes, exactly.
I love it. I'm super down. I think when I think about the stuff that I like to write at every and just generally and every like the kind of vibe that we are aiming for is like we cover business technology in the examined life. So we're always kind of like interested in businesses and companies and
Mhm.
new technologies and all that kind of stuff. And then we're also interested in like who we are and how we live.
Right.
And that's sort of the examined life portion. And I don't think that you are what you build. I think that you build what you are. And so if you're
Mm.
the kind of person that wants to make things in the world, I think it's really important to have a good understanding of who you are because that's going to be reflected in what you build, what you want to build, and what goes out into the world. And so we always have a part of the coverage on every that's not just like, okay, how do you build businesses or how do you ship products or how do you write or how do you think? It's like actually how do you introspect? How do you build a better life for
Mm.
yourself? How do you understand who you are? And that's why I kind of like the modern day digital philosopher thing that Grok said because I it's coming through in my tweets to some extent. But yeah, so I think that's the general vibe. I think, I always like writing that is thoughtful, that's introspective. I love writing that
Mm.
is kind of like lyrical and poetic and sort of visceral.
Yeah.
I really like I really like writing that's analytical and goes deep into interesting ideas and interesting topics. And I
Mm.
also like writing that's personal and psychological and sometimes like even confessional. And I like to wrap all of that up in a bow of being accessible. Like I just want it to
Mm.
be readable by everyone. I want it to be entertaining to read, interesting to read, fun to read, all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
And so I think that's the bar that I try to hit with my writing, and that's try to some of what we try to infuse into the rest of what's on every.
Absolutely. And I think as a reader of Every, I can agree with a lot of what you said. And this vibe, especially, is very special as I hear you talk about it because I find that this is a very unique intersection, right? Because when it comes to businesses, startup stuff, people often talk about the core and foundational parts of building businesses, which, like you said, is more about how do you do this? Like, how do you do X and fill that X with anything? Like, how do you build a software? How do you find product market fit, but to really get to that visceral layer of who am I as a person, like what is it that really drives me, and getting to that level of philosophical way of finding it and then relating that with tech. I think it's a very, very interesting intersection. And I tell a lot of people that finding that joint intersection is going to help them build great stuff. And I think what you're doing with Every is exactly sitting at this dimension. So glad to hear that.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I mean, yeah, it is sort of a reflection of my own interests and journey and all that kind of stuff. And I just the
Mhm.
longer I am around and building businesses or writing stuff, the more it is clear to me that like there's a lot of wasted time and talent and potential from people who are trying to do things because they think that they should, or they're trying to run a company a certain way or trying to write in a certain way because that's what they think someone else that they admire or someone else that they're jealous of or whatever does, and they
Yeah.
should do it. And I think obviously there's a lot of it's really important to imitate people in certain ways, especially early
Mm.
on in your journey, because imitation is sort of the only way to understand like, does this work for me, or like to find
Right.
what you want to. But I think there's a lot of people who are kind of grinding at things that they don't really care about, or they shouldn't really be
Mm.
doing fit for who they are. And so I think like writing things that help give people the maybe the motivation or the confidence or the courage to like really be honest about who they are and what they want, I think is like
Mm.
a really good lever to create more people making great stuff in the world.
Wow, this sounds so therapeutic already. It's so calming to kind of hear this. And now that you bring this about, Dan, I loved reading your essay on admitting what is obvious. And you know what we're talking about now in terms of what really motivates us and finding a very retrospective and introspective way of all of this is relating to that kind of an essay. And there were so many strong points from that a creative person could infer to. So as somebody who relates with being a writer and now a connoisseur of philosophy and a software builder and now somebody who's playing around with AI, how do you view these identities coming together, and what's it like to have all of this meet at a certain spot?
Yeah, it's a good question. So that piece is it's called admitting what is obvious, and it was sort of
Mhm.
me tracking my journey to kind of admit to myself that I wanted to write. I wanted to be a writer because my background is I come from tech, and I previously had a software company, and the way that we started Every, which is the company that I now run, it was started as a tech company, sort of an intersection of media and tech. And over time, like we still do a lot of, I mean, it's a business. Um, and we still do a lot of tech stuff. We've incubated software products. We're doing more of that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
But over time, I switched from sort of the traditional CEO role where I was like, oh, I have to like be in all the meetings and like, you know, other people should write because like I'm the CEO. So like that's CEOs like set the strategy and they raise the money and whatever. And over time, I sort of realized that Every is a different kind of business than the business that I'd run previously, and that actually what would be better for the business is
Mm.
for me to be the writer or one of the writers. That's what I'm good at, and it's also like I love it. I think it's really great. It's it just is the thing that makes me happy, basically. And
Right.
so, but that took a while for me to like even realize or admit to myself because I was giving up. I felt like I had to give up this like founder identity or this like builder of companies identity, and
Mm.
actually don't think that that's true. And the minute I started to like play around with it, like maybe I should write, like how could I do that? Like I started to find all these examples of people who are in my position that were creators that were also running businesses, and they had made very similar decisions. Like one of the people that I
Mhm.
came across, this guy, Bill Simmons, who runs The Ringer, big sports pop culture website and podcast. And they sold it to Spotify for like a couple $100 million. And he was like one of their main voices. He's also the CEO and founder. And and so like he managed to like run the business and be like a main content creator type voice. But you can find other examples of that, like I don't know, Sam Harris, who has his podcast and books.
Yeah.
He also has a meditation app. there's Mr. Beast. He's got, obviously he's a huge YouTuber. He's got like snacks and a snack company. And what all these people end up doing is they come up by writing and or making videos or whatever the creative thing is. And when they start to get popular and they want to run a business, they don't actually stop doing that stuff. That's what they're there
Right.
for. What they do is they create a crew of other people around them who they trust to like go and operate the businesses.
Mhm.
And they are sort of like the keeper of the vision for those businesses, but they're not operating them day to day. So that's exactly what I realized I had to do. So I hired Kate Lee, who is our incredible editor in chief at Every, and she does a lot of the day to day stuff, and and that gives me a lot of time to write and do my podcast and all that kind of stuff. And I think getting to your question, um, I think like identities, saying I'm a writer, they feel kind of scary because you're like, what am I not a founder anymore? Am I not like whatever, all this other stuff? And it feels scary to like pigeonhole yourself.
Yeah.
And it's like everyone is a lot of things. Like I'm a writer, I'm a founder, I'm a programmer, I'm a, I don't know. There's a lot of things that I am.
Mhm.
And but I think there's a lot of benefit of declaring to yourself in certain circumstances. Sometimes people get too tied to their identities, but like for
Right.
me, there was a lot of benefit in like in deciding to emphasize the writer part of me for a while because
Mhm.
I think that it was like this little spark of like the thing that I like really wanted, but I just couldn't really like quite allow myself to have. And so just like kind of being like, hey, like, no, 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 you can come out, you can come out, buddy. It was like a really good little thing to do. And I think what's really important to remember is that like that emphasis or the way that you treat your identity is like it's not a forever thing. It's like an always shifting, always changing balance.
Mm.
And I have the ability, if I want, to like tomorrow wake up and be like, no, 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 I'm a CEO or I'm a programmer, or whatever.
Mhm.
I don't think it's necessarily good to be like changing your identity like every week or how you think of yourself every week, but like there is some timeline on which it is helpful
Right.
and just be like, I'm doing something else. And if you look at the biographies or paths of famous people, like many of them have tried like 50 different things. And so
Absolutely.
I think giving yourself the room to both define this is the era that I'm
Mhm.
in, and I know that like I'll be in another era at some point is helpful.
Mhm. Wow. Yeah, that sounds so much relatable because I keep talking to my friends about this concept of identities are very fluid. As much as you get scared about taking a certain identity and sticking yourself to it. And I just hear you say a very similar thing. So it so hits the right note for me when I keep hearing this. And yeah, when you explained this to me, it sounded more like you keep building out different concentric circles, but somewhere the center is still very grounded. Like you kind of come back to what your unique strength is. And in this case, your unique strength is writing. But you keep building around narratives and circles around that as a strength, and somewhere that still stays as a ground. So it's so good that when I hear about a lot of these examples that you stated, all of them had a very central narrative to who they are as a creator. But it was so fascinating that they've had multiple facets for the outside world to look at. Hey, like, why is Mr. Beast, doing a podcast? Like, what is he doing with folks on his show? Whereas it's also like a snack company that he runs, and like, there are like so many, narratives around. So, so good to hear those examples as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So one question that I can't stop but really curious about is to go back to your tech days, which you built a software out of your school days, and this was when the idea of Firefly came about, and whatsoever you thought that was like the right time to build it, and you kind of shipped it out to now being in a very different league and reflecting on a lot of things. How do you juxtapose this, and like what would you say as the different thing about building software then and where we are now, like looking at your purview of things now?
I mean, I think personally, I have a lot more leverage now to build than I did
Hmm.
back then because we have more money. I have an audience. I have a team. I have not just a team, but I have a lot of people that I've worked with over many years that I can bring in if
Hmm.
I need. And so I think like it's just easier to build stuff now, but that just like personally for me, but I think in general we're on this like it's like this incredible time where it's so easy and quick to build something if you know how to code with AI. It's just like it's unbelievable. Like I had this idea for this app. We did a Think Week last week at Every, and I Think Week is like every quarter. What we're trying to do is we don't publish new articles, and we sort of take ourselves out of the daily grind, and we just sort of think about like what are the big questions that we think are important right now. Like what are we curious about, and that helps us set our coverage and what we're going to do for the quarter. And on Think Week last week, I just got psyched about this idea that I had for an app, and I like literally just built it in a day. Like it started at 10 a.m. and
Wow.
finished at like midnight, and it was done. And it like we're using it now internally, and it's like really great.
Wow.
And that was just like not possible. I mean, maybe it was possible for some kind of programmer, but not possible for me
Hmm.
when I was in college. I mean, I did a lot of those kinds of projects, like where it was like, okay, it's a weekend hackathon, and we like
Hmm.
ship or ship a new feature or whatever. Like I did a lot of that. And so I'm used to being able to like build things quickly with me or just me and a couple people. But this is like a different it's like a different
Yeah.
level. Like there's so much stuff in standing up a small product now that used to take like, it would take a couple days to do that just take like a few seconds or a couple minutes or whatever. It just
Hmm.
takes a lot of the boilerplate problem solving and Googling of Stack Overflow answers like off the table, and you can get something like really useful really quick. And I just think that for anyone that's creative and wants to make stuff, it's like it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, no, sounds super interesting. And what was this app specifically? Do you want to give more context in terms of like how does it help you
Sure.
internally?
Yeah. So one thing that I noticed a lot at Every is we end up doing a lot of summarizing of different pieces of work. So
Right.
you can imagine if I write an article or someone at Every writes an article, that article has to be turned into a great headline and subhead. And that headline and subhead is like,
Hmm.
so to some degree, a summary of the article. It's like the quickest little summary you can possibly
Yeah.
make. Same thing for like turning it into a tweet. Tweets are summaries. And there's not just one summary. There's like there are many different kinds of summaries you can make from an article
Hmm.
into tweets. Same thing for we have this digest that goes out every week that says, here are the articles we publish. And it's sort of a voicey. We have a voicey, our lead writer, Evan, does these like voicey digest summaries that I think are great, but like are,
Hmm.
take a lot of time to do. Same thing for if I publish a podcast, I need to take the podcast transcript and turn it into a tweet or into show notes, all that kind of stuff. There's just like, there's all that stuff. And it turns out, I think for a media company, like producing incredible summaries, like really being able to convert something from one format to another is like it's just like a core thing. And I realized last week that Claude is actually like a good enough writer to like basically get you 80 to 90% of the way there, which
Oh
is
yeah.
totally new. Like it wasn't possible like 6 months ago. GPT-4 is not good enough at it, but Claude
Yeah.
is. So I built this little tool called Spiral.
Mm-hmm.
And basically what you can do is you say, I want to convert X to Y. So I can say, I want to convert, articles to tweets or podcast summaries to show notes or whatever. And then you give it a bunch of examples of what good looks like. You're like, okay, here's a bunch of things I've already done that I think are great. And then you go through a couple more steps, and then it just creates this little form where it's like, okay, now you have this general purpose essay to tweet converter. So you just throw in an essay, you press go, it turns it into a tweet. I also just built this right before we got on the call. I
Hmm.
built this like make it great button, which does it like 5 times and then
Yeah.
ranks them. Claude ranks them, which is pretty cool. And then you can publish the spiral so that anybody on the team can use it. And so that's a way for me to kind of infuse my taste or what I think is good into everyone on the team, into how we make stuff, because I don't
Mm-hmm.
have to do all the editing. I just have to gather the examples and build the spiral, and then we're sort of already on always on the right in the right ballpark, and that's, like, really cool.
Right. No, this sounds super interesting. And to me, I think what I really loved about it was it's just not about only you trying it out, but also passing along references and making everybody else get excited about it. Because we often do this as we read good stuff on the internet, we find good tweets. We have this tendency to immediately like share it with that close set of friends. We're like, hey, like check this out. This was so cool. And sometimes there's like less context on it. So in this case, I like the fact that this goes out as a very curated read and like a very curated summary kind of a thing that you can keep tabs on. Like, I'd love to check this out. It's so cool to hear about it.
Yeah, I think we'll probably make it public in the next couple weeks, but I'm, like, trying to refine it
Oh,
and make sure for everyone internally and all that kinda stuff.
oh, that's nice. That's nice. All the best, and I'm rooting for it, and can't wait to try it out already.
I appre
And in fact, Dan, there's like a fun question that I have for you, and I know that you consistently set aside time for reading, and some of your books kind of go back in time and reminds me of what Mark Andreessen often says about reading books from past ages. And I've always found that whenever you tweet this, hey folks, like I'm reading this book, and the title is somewhere like going way back in past in time. So the twist is that I think you also use AI to kind of go along this book activity. So talk to us about this practice now that we are very much to AI and talking about how to better use ChatGPT, Claude. Tell us how you use AI with respect to reading stuff and especially like books and rereading books and using AI together in this process.
So, I think it's really useful for a couple different parts of the reading process. One is just finding books. So,
Hmm.
anytime I have, like, a life situation where I'm like, I'm really interested in, like, people who have written about this, either fiction or nonfiction, or if I have a bunch of books where I'm like, I wanna find something new, but, like, I don't know what to read. I just throw either diary entries or a bunch of book titles into ChatGPT or Claude, and I'm just like, "Give me books that are kinda like this, that are on this vibe, or that might answer some of the questions that I'm dealing with." It's actually, like, pretty good. It's definitely recommended some books where it's like, I just never would
Hmm.
have necessarily read this, but it's, like, actually exactly what I needed to read, which is, like, really cool. So it's good for, like, sourcing books and, like, kinda helping you understand and articulate your taste, and then finding more stuff like it. And I think
Right.
that, like, the articulation is such an incredible part of AI, and is such an important part of being a creative person, is, like, knowing what you like and being able to express it in words, and AI is just perfect for that. I think also it's very good for reading books better. So there's a lot of books, like, I was reading what was I reading? Moby Dick,
Mm,
which, it can be hard to, like, read Moby Dick outside of an English lit class, because there's, like, a lot of references that you might not understand,
true.
and there's, like, all this stuff in it, and ChatGPT is really good. Like, I just sit there with the app open, I'm reading. If I come across a passage that I can't quite understand, or there's a word that I don't know or whatever, I just take a picture, and then it just explains it to me, which is, like, really nice.
Hmm.
And it can also pull apart, like, what are the themes or what are the patterns, like, all that kind of stuff, which is really great. And it also I will often, like, take a picture and have Dolly, like, make an image, and it sort of, like, brings the book to life for me in this nice way. And I was just doing this yesterday with another book, this, like, very dense philosophy book that I've had for a while, called Philosophy and Social
Right.
Hope by Richard Rorty. And there are so many things in that book that I've had it for a long time, I've read it a bunch, but I just, like, I always knew that there was stuff that I didn't quite understand, but I didn't have anyone to ask about it, because it's all very, like, deep hard philosophy. Like, I feel like I would have to, like, actually go back to school and get a master's to understand it. And I just can ask ChatGPT now, and it, like, seriously increases my comprehension of these types of books, which is, like, just a real
Mm,
pleasure.
true. No, that's very true. And I think like somewhere, like you said, it leverages and makes you read better because earlier I think the way that we were often conditioned to reading books was, yeah, like I just started this, so let me go along and complete it. And oftentimes we kind of drift off in between, and more so because it gets very hard to understand the crux, or like we lose interest. I think AI personally for me as well has been like a great leverage to find that newness back in books and also like find that connectivity once again, because there are times that you can use it to quickly check something out. Like it's like how dictionary used to be for us when we were kids growing up. Like you just used it as a way to quickly check out, read more about words. But this time AI is not just about words; it's going to be about the entire context of the book, or like you said, of brilliant examples, like extending the book beyond what you see in the covers. And as an artist as well, like I can relate to the Dali thing where I think it's very fascinating to visualize different imagery to a book and see where it goes. So that's a fun idea.
Cool. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah, no, totally. And there are like tons of use cases, right, for AI. And I'm sure, like, every week you keep learning a lot of things because you talk to folks on your podcast about AI stuff, which I would come back to. But, there's tons of use cases. And I'm very curious about your extended interest in maximizing the potential and capacity of the mind, because we're talking about a lot of philosophy and the way that you can retrospect and get better at knowing who you are. So, there's a time where we are currently seeing a lot of custom GPTs, the way that you can train your own AI and get forward. And I think we are at a spot where a person generates an app with a custom GPT. But do you think moving forward, all of us would have our own AI generated apps for ourselves, where and it leads us forward to have our own tone, our own way of thinking, something that would translate to how we think and act. What are your core beliefs around AI and creativity, and how do you see this going forward decade?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI is already sort of personal in that you get out what you put in. And so
Hmm.
the like prompts and all the stuff that I'm putting in are just different from what you might. And
Yeah.
because we're different people, we're with different interests. And I think it's already like fairly customizable and fairly good at like giving different things based on what you want. Like Claude, I mean, it's just like it can write like me, which is like crazy that it writes like me. And it can write like other people too. And I think that's really cool. Like whether or not we have custom GPTs or there it's just like one model or whatever.
Hmm.
I tend to like believe in a future where there's many different models doing many different types of things, and that can either mean like actually different models like Claude versus Anthropic, or you know a foundation model. Maybe there's a couple of dominant foundation models that are
Yeah.
tuned or set or prompted to like have many different personalities or purposes for which they're good for. I definitely think that that's coming. I don't know if that answers your question, but like that's sort of how I think about it.
Right. No, yeah. I was really curious about what was your thought around because we're talking about using AI for a lot of our building the creative taste, right? Like whether it is writing, whether it is some sort of an input that goes on in our mind, and to get that as an output. Beyond using it as a means to just, I would say, like accelerate. I think that's where most of the chat GPT started, right? It was like, hey, do you want to make a trip here? Like this helps you find a itinerary. Like, do you really want to find a recipe? This helps you find stuff. So I think somewhere we started off with like search and fine tuning what we already had around us. To now, I see a lot of focus on the exact things that you said, like stuff that AI can do to write like us, to think like us, and perhaps get very closer to getting an outcome that is very, very similar to what we would do with hands-on building or like, core thinking. So I'm seeing the way the narrative is changing, right? Like where it started off as a sidekick to now getting very, very aligned and in tuned with what we do. I mean, like I'm sure you would have seen the demo of Hume AI as well. And I was like fascinated to see how there is this voice and like I could chat with it and like who knows, like down the line, this can be more like just think about this and this is going to do the work for you. Like just voice out your thoughts. So that's what I was, getting more curious at.
So are you asking like the sort of like co-pilot augmenter versus like just
Yes.
being replacing?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's like pretty clear that there are certain ways in which AIs will like replace certain types of human activity. So like a really good example is because I have this spiral thing, like I don't have to like write the first draft of my tweets about podcasting where I just don't have to do that, right? Um,
Mhm.
And it's sort of the equivalent of, like, having hired someone who's really talented to do it, which I've been trying to do for a long time, and we have a lot of talented writers that work for us, but it's just, like, hard to find someone that will do it exactly like I will do it, and Claude is that person or is that thing. So so it's clear that there are, certain types of tasks that, like, we will no longer have to do or have to do nearly as much. I think some people will still do them, like, we have cars, but, like, people compete in races or, like, love to run, but, like, you know so I think people will still do them. They're still humans value excellence in other humans, even if something else could do it better,
Right.
like, so so I'm not really, like, worried about that necessarily.
Mm,
And I think it sort of raises the ceiling on what you just can do. So, like, another thing about humans is we're sort of, like, endlessly ambitious and don't really like to be not doing anything generally.
mm,
And so I think it's Charlie Munger that said, like, the world runs on envy. Like, it sort of does. Like,
yeah.
you're always where am I versus other people, just as, like, human, and and so it causes us to, if AI does one thing pretty well, we're like, "Cool, like, now I'll manage that, the AI doing that thing, other things," And I think we're just, like, endlessly creative about that and endlessly flexible. That's not to say that, like, sometimes, look, there might be impacts where, like, whole jobs
Mm,
go away, and I think we'll have to deal with that. I don't think that that will be easy, and I don't wanna be flippant about
true.
that, but I generally think that over the, like, longer arc of this, we will invent many, many new jobs and new opportunities and new things for humans to do that uses these capabilities to, like, I mean, hopefully create better lives for everyone to
Mm,
flourish, create you know, make progress in science and all that kind of stuff. Like, that's the hope. Obviously, there's a lot of danger, and it'll probably be there's always bumps along the way, but
yeah.
I believe in that pretty strongly as a
Yeah.
strong possibility.
Yeah. Totally agree with you there. And as we are in this phase, I think the best thing we could do is to ride along and kind of see what's the best way we can align our motivations and triggers together with what I think the piece of technology progresses forward. And yeah, like leave the rest of things to figuring out as the time unravels. But yeah, true. Cool. So Dan, let's come back to every. So we spoke about how the newsletter was shaped and how it's run as a creative media business. So for me, I was looking at it as, this was at an idea stage where it started off as a creative pursuit. And then to run it as a profitable business, it sounds like, two different horizons. So especially I can like from how you talk about every and the way that I've seen it, it looks like a very purposely built marginable company, but more about intrinsic alignment to it. So, how did this thought come to you, and what lessons came to you, like in terms of shipping something from a creative project to actually running it as a business in entirety?
Hmm. Well, it was always meant to be a business.
Hmm.
I like to start businesses by starting projects. It's just, like, more fun for me. It's how my brain works, 'cause I like to build stuff.
Right.
The original idea for it, I was I was just really interested in I wanted to build, like, a Roam Notion type, like, tools for thought software company, and I was thinking about I wanted to do a lot of customer interviews
Mm,
with interest, see how they, like, took notes and all that kinda stuff, and I was trying to think about, how do I get in front of interesting people to, like, do customer interviews with them to understand how they manage their knowledge and what they know? And so I was like, "Well, I'll just start a newsletter, and I'll tell them
mhm.
I'm interviewing them for the newsletter, and I'll write the newsletter because I love writing, but I'll really use what I learned to build software." And I just sort of got stuck on the newsletter part. It was sort of right at the beginning of the Substack wave. I started working with my co-founder, Nathan. We were both we decided to both write newsletters, and then we decided to bundle them, and it sort of, like, took off, and yeah, I mean, It's definitely different going from being someone like a founder who loves writing and writes on the side because it's fun to like,
Mm.
I have to write every week and I'm kind of like, I'm thinking about how to grow it. Like it's just, it is a bit of a different mindset, but like overall, the idea was always to start a company in some way.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. So that makes sense. And I think you sounded a lot like Anne-Laure to me when I had a chat with her as well. We spoke about this bit about the tools for thought and how can one think better. And somewhere I think we're aligned on the same page of finding people who love using these tools and, speaking to them and getting started. Yeah, yeah. Good to know that you also are in the same league.
Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah. And
So for me, the other thing that fascinates about Every is the style that you've set with writing, right? It's very deep, intense, and long form essays that kind of bridge technology, productivity, AI stuff that we spoke about. So whether it's like a huge 5,000, 6,000 piece writing, or it's a video that you share with folks that you sit down and chat about AI, like this one thing to constantly like sit down and create and ship and be consistent, and there's this other phase where you kind of deal with, hey, like I'm really clueless about you know bringing this to an edge or bringing this to completion. So have you personally handled self-doubt or this kind of bell curve of emotions while building this as a project?
yeah, yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of very different eras that have different forms of doubt and different challenges, different psychological
Hmm.
challenges. I think the place where I am now is like it's pretty automatic for me to just like, get a piece out every week, and I can like pretty much do
Hmm.
that. That's not that's not hard. It doesn't feel intimidating. And that's sort of a function of just doing a lot and having a lot of people who depend on me to do that, you know? It's different, like, before I was a professional writer, like, no one cared if I got the blog post out or whatever, so it was easier to, like, not do it. Now it's like, "No, no, no." People will be, upset if I don't do it. I think the thing for me now, the place where I am is noticing the times when I'm, like, just stuck in this kinda, like, I'm doing this because I have to mode versus like a sort of playful, like I'm like laughing to myself as I'm writing it and like I'm like reading and like really I have this like this when I'm reading where I can like really tell like how is this making me feel? Do I like this and why? Because I think that
Hmm.
that translates into the writing and noticing that I sort of go back and forth. And I think that that is just a sort of natural thing to do as a creator, like, sometimes you're on, sometimes you're not, you gotta ship anyway, and I would guess that, like, if you looked at my pieces, like, you probably wouldn't be able to tell, but, like, I could tell, and yeah, like, really trying to think about what puts me in that 2nd place, which is a little bit more playful and freer, and I think just I will eventually produce better work in that place, and then B, I think I'm very good at doing a lot of volume, I work really fast,
Right.
I'm pretty consistent. And I'm very good at, like, figuring out how to, like, lower the stakes for myself psychologically so that I just, like, do stuff, and it's not perfect, but it's good. And I think one of the trade-offs of that mindset is that you can sometimes ignore the, like, the bigger questions that you really need to, like, spend a little bit more time on, like, really, like, feel like they're like, "This is my actual important thing. This is the actual important idea that I wanna express as a person," versus, like, "This is, like, just an essay that I'm gonna do this week," or, "This is just a tweet," or whatever.
Mm.
And it's sort of like this tricky thing where you don't wanna be like, "I'm going to just, like, go off into my cave and, like, write about what's most important right now," because, like, I think often that's like a you're setting yourself up to fail, like, those tasks are too big and too intimidating and whatever, but you also don't wanna ignore the most important question for yourself.
Mm.
Or the work that is, like, yours to do right now, like, the thing that, like, is being pulled out of you, you don't wanna ignore that. And so, I think one of the things I'm trying to do, and this is why we did this Think Week, is, like, identify for myself those questions and, like, especially for this next quarter, like, see if I can try to approach them and do that in a light way where, you know, I'm not going off to, like, write for 3 months. I'm, like, writing every week, but about the questions that matter to me, and even if I write something bad, that's fine. And I think that'll be really interesting. I'm excited to see what happens from that.
I think the think week is also like sounding more like the time that you sit down to really focus on what's happening around you, because sometimes a lot of thoughts keep coming to us, but the kind of slow, calm moments that we need to capture to sit down and recognize why we really feel certain things or what's going on in our mind often goes off in a rush, right? And that's because we are kind of like constantly thinking about, oh, like there's a deadline or there's something that I have to work on. So giving more space and room for those slow, what I usually call as daydreams. Like sometimes you just have to daydream because you don't know where it takes you to, but it kind of opens up your mind, and perhaps like without a certain constraint on these are the kind of thoughts that have to come to me. So yeah, that sounds more in that league. And a lot of what you said to arrive at this is what really matters to me, or like I want to spend my time this way, sounds like how you need to know more about yourself. So I think coming back to where we started off this conversation with was the high amount of self-awareness and doing a lot of introspection on oneself. I think it's definitely coming out in different spots, don't you agree, like in different ways?
Definitely. I think, like, you don't get to know what questions are important or what things you wanna actually do if you don't do the introspection. I think, like,
Hmm.
also don't get to know that if you don't actually go out and do stuff. Like, it's sort of this
Right.
combo thing where I think people look at introspection and they're like, "Oh, it's, like, too navel-gazy," or whatever,
Yeah.
and it can be, totally. It's not all good. You can overdose on it. Think the best the people that do the best work have a good balance of the 2, like,
Right.
you have to be prolific. That's, like, my number 1 word for myself and all the writers we work with is, like, you've gotta be prolific, but then you also have to be able to take a step back and be like, "What do I actually wanna do here? Like, why?" You know? And
Hmm.
so finding balance is really important.
Yeah. I can't agree enough on that. Very true. Yeah. Cool. So then there's this another thing that I would, want to touch upon, which is there are some influences that strongly drive us in our work, and these can come from different time periods or spaces that we don't necessarily have to be in physically. And I saw you once quote about how you have a strong sense towards the 70s aesthetics and the vibes, especially for inspiration. So,
Yeah.
what's the reason behind? And the reason I ask this question is because I love understanding about what people's taste and aesthetic is all about, and like where do they really draw their inspiration from. And I was like very fascinated to see, oh, like 70s and why particularly 70s. So I would love for you to talk about this to the audience as well.
Yeah, I've been on this, like, 70s kick. I think the 70s was the last time in America where technology felt like I mean, not maybe not the last time, but it is like a shining moment where technology felt, like, good. We were landing on the moon, you know? The PC was created. There was a lot of, like, optimism. It wasn't technology wasn't yet, like, a huge business where it was, like, subject to all the, like, complicated questions and sometimes negative forces that huge businesses are subject to, and it was, like, this, like, band of nerds that just were, like, making stuff because they thought it was amazing. And yeah, we were going to the moon, and I think just the '70s in general was it had a little bit of the optimism of the '60s, and, I'm sure that someone who was actually alive in the '70s is probably, like, banging their hand on the table being fully wrong. I'm open to being wrong about this, but this is my picture of the '70s. I think that it had a little bit of the optimism of the '60s, but the '60s was very utopian and, like, sort of pie in the sky in my view, and the
Hmm.
'70s, like, a little bit more nuanced, a little bit like, there's still hope, but, like, it's not gonna be, like, just all utopian, and for that reason, I think the vibes of the '70s are a little bit more, like, authentic and real,
Right.
and of the music of the '70s, I love, like, singer-songwriter type people like Jackson Browne, and so I think all of that is, like, feels very core to me or organic to me,
Mhm.
and it's something that we try to evoke in the show that I do and other places around Every, and that's why.
Hmm. Yeah, that sounds so good to hear. And I think now it could feel like nostalgia, but I completely get the sense of what you mean is things felt very new and in the making. And I don't know, like maybe was it also because technology at that time was always like a work in progress in the sense that now there's a lot of pressure, or there's a lot of thought around when there's something out as a piece of technology, there's like a completeness to it, or there's like this whole shiny kind of a layer that is just not very authentic about it. But I guess way back it was more like, hey, like tech has just started, and it's also like figuring out the narrative, and people are just so excited by the newness that they see, and this newness was very genuine and nothing very artificial, nothing very you know like too shiny about things for the wrong reasons.
I totally think you're onto something there for sure.
Yeah, yeah, cool. Like, I mean, yeah, like I really love this retro thing that we do on the show. It's so good. Cool. So now that we're talking about the aesthetic part, there's another thing that I would love to pick your brain on as for the aesthetic sense, which is what's something in the physical world that excites you, and because we're talking a lot about AI and using these digital worlds. If there's still something in the physical world that excites you, something that you can turn as inspiration for, building generative worlds on words. So, what is something that you still have an excitement about in the physical world?
I mean, I love books. That's the easiest thing for me to say. Like, I read all the time. I have, like you can't see it, but I have, like, hun
No, I can clearly see it.
and I think that there's something about, like, a physical book that is different for me from, like, digital books. I think,
Mhm.
Seth said, like, "A physical book is a souvenir of an idea," which I really like, and I find that, like, I will read Kindle for things that I just need to reference a lot or don't really matter to me as much,
Mhm.
but everything on Kindle just has the sort of same flavor or same taste to me, like, I can't tell what book
Mm.
I'm in. It's like it's just a screen with words on it,
I hear you.
um, and physical books have much more character to them, which I really like.
Oh yeah.
It help it helps me feel like I'm doing something new, I'm into this new idea, I'm
Yeah.
in story, all that kinda stuff, and maybe, like, at some point, Amazon will, like, get it shit together and, like, not do that, and maybe sell more digital books because 'cause I'm, like, running out of space in my apartment, but, I do really love physical books for that reason.
Oh yeah, lovely, lovely to know. And for folks who can still see some amount of books on Dan's background. Trust me, this guy has books in his sink as well. Like there's too many books that you would see floating around. So yeah, that's lovely reference. And you're so damn right about the taste part. So I mean, like I just like pulled in the books that I had right next to me. I know, like when I was reading through, I think I don't know if you've already checked out The Creative Act. I am loving this book, Rick Rubin's book. It is so good. And this other book that I was just thinking about the aesthetics part, which is like, it's called The Lord of the Decans. And I love the book cover. Like I was just thinking, oh God, like if I'd picked this up in Kindle, like I don't really think I would have gotten the touch and the feel of the book and the way it really looks and, brings about a taste. So you're damn right about it.
Thank you.
So cool. Dan, so we've come to the end of this episode. I would, thank you so much for sharing so many good anecdotes, not just from every, but also like a lot of what like really motivates you and pushes you with respect to taste, aesthetics, and building and shipping things out. So if there's like one thought that you'd like to leave the session with, I, would love to pick your brain on the AI part, like because you sit and talk to so many folks on your podcast as well, was one new thing that you learned from somebody on your show as a podcast guest on your show? What's one thing that you've learned from them, which is very new for you with respect to AI?
Well, you just referenced Hume, and I just interviewed the founder of Hume, which is it's an
Mm-hmm.
AI that detects emotional states, and it can not only detect it in your voice and in your face and all that kind of stuff, but it can express them. So it has proper expression of emotion, and it's it's like the way it inflects its voice and all that kind of stuff when it talks to you. And I loved doing that episode because it got me into emotion science. I think like what an emotion
Mm.
is, really interesting question. It's like we all have them, but like what are they? And there's a bunch of different theories of what an emotion is. And the one that Hume is based on is this theory called semantic space theory. And basically like it's sort of hard to explain it concisely, but you can think of all of emotional experience as a very high dimensional space. So, and by high dimensional, I mean like there's more than 3 dimensions and it's space. And then the way that they think about mapping emotions is every emotion word has a location in that space, and some locations are closer than others. And so that's how they detect it. They basically like they map they map where your face is goes in that space, and then look at the word that is most closely related to that. And I think I'm getting this mostly right. And I thought that was like really interesting. And the thing that
Yeah.
really blew my mind about it is it caused me to reflect on like what art is and what creative expression is. And I think like often creative expression is the process of naming something and territory in that space that has not that a lot of people experience but has not been named before. And that's sort of like what good art does, and that's why good art like makes you feel less alone because you're like someone else has like experienced that. And that was sort of like a really interesting sciencey, mathy, philosophical expression of that idea.
Yeah, it's where all the spheres came together. And I really have goosebumps listening to it because as an artist and as somebody who's been in tech, I can like totally correlate both and see, how they can coexist with each other. And a lot of the Hume thing, I was fascinated as well when I tried out the demo. I was like, this is so cool. Like, how does it even map with the words that I say? And it kind of like the best part is it highlights the sentiment levels, right? And it kind of adds the weightage to each word. And I'm like, wow, like, how does this do? And now, when you like just broke it down for me, I was thinking how much of this relates with the way our neural network in the brain also works. I love Eagleman's books on how the brain works, and like the very similar way of how our neural pattern connects thoughts based on territories and buckets, like the way it forms patterns. I think it's very similar to the semantic network thing that we're talking about. It's so fascinating, and a lot of it comes back to science. So yeah,
Awesome.
nice to
Thank you.
know.
I'm glad you liked it. Yeah, it was really fascinating.
No, no, absolutely. And yes, thank you so much, Dan. It was a pleasure having you on the show. I personally like learned so much because I've been like fangirling over your work for the longest time. So it's like so good to finally sit down with you and chat with you on the show. And I hope it's going to be the same for the listeners as well to get to know about the other fantastic AI stuff that you're doing as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It was really fun.
Yeah.